Chapter 23 of Beyond the Rocks, a love story by Elinor Glyn. Beechley was a really fine place, built by Van Brugh in his best days. 3 tiers of 15 tall windows looked to the north in a front and 2 short wings, while colonnades led down to splendid wrought iron gates and blocks of buildings constructed in the same stately style. 15 more windows faced the south, and the center one of the first floor led with sweeping steps to a terrace, while 7 casements adorned each of the eastern and western sides. On the southern side the view for that rather flat country was superb. It gave from a considerable elevation, through a wide opening of giant oaks and elms, a peep of the lake a mile below, and on in a long avenue of turf to a vista of smiling country. On the splendid terrace peacocks spread their tails, and vases of carved stone broke at intervals the gray old balustrade. Inside the house was equally nobly planned, all the rooms of great height and perfect proportion, and filled with pictures and tapestries and bronzes and antiques of immense value. It had come to these spendthrift Irish Fitzgeralds through their grandmother, the last of an old ducal race, and 2 generations of Hibernian influence had curtailed the fine fortune which went with it, until Sir Patrick often felt it no easy matter to make both ends meet in the luxurious and gilded fashion which was necessary to himself and his friends. If he and Lady Ada pinched and scraped when alone, keeping few servants on board wages, the parties at all events were done with their all-wonted regal splendor. "I shall stay with you, Patrick, as long as you can afford this cook," Lady Harrowfield said once to him. "But when you begin to economize, don't trouble to ask me. I hate poor people when it shows." A promising son on the true Fitzgerald lines was at Oxford now, and gave many anxious crow's feet full opportunity of developing round his mother's faded eyes. A plain daughter, Barbara, was pushed into corners and left much to herself, and a brilliant, flashing, up-to-date niece of Lady Ada's took always the first place. Mildred was so clever, and her lovers were so well chosen, and so thoroughly of the right set or of great wealth, while a puny husband was helped to something in South Africa when the man in possession was a Jew, or as agent for tea and jam in the colonies, when he happened to be only a colossally successful Englishman. And once during a prominent politician's reign, poor Willie Verner enjoyed a few months in his own land as secretary to a newly started radical club. This Whitsuntide party was perhaps the smartest of the year. By Saturday evening over 30 people would be gathered together under the Beechley roof. Josiah, though exceedingly proud and pleased at the invitation, felt nervous at the thought of the visit. Not so Mr. Toplington, who, although he knew he should probably have to blush for his master, and might get a very secondary place in the room, still felt he could hold his own when he could let it be known what magnificent wages he received from Mr. Brown. "A long sight more than I'd get out of any lord," he thought, "and money is money, and all classes feels it." Theodora, on the contrary, was neither proud nor pleased. She looked forward to the visit with excitement and dread. Hector would be there among all the people whom she did not know, and her awakened heart had begun to tell her that she loved him wildly, and to see him could only be alternate mad joy and remorse and anguish. It was still drizzling on the Saturday afternoon when they arrived, so tea awaited them in the great salon which made the center of the north side of the house. Several of the rest of the guests had come down in the same train, but they did not know them, nor did any of them trouble themselves much to speak to them on the short drive from the station. A few words, that was all, addressed to Theodora. Josiah was ignored. Sir Patrick had always been an excellent host. His genial Irish smile, when in action, concealed the ill-tempered lines of his thin old face. He greeted his guests cordially, and made them welcome to his home. Lady Ada had the inherited bad manners of her family, the de Baronsvilles, who had come over with the Conqueror, and when one has a cachet like that, there is no need to trouble oneself further. Thus, while Mildred flashed brilliant witticisms about, plain Barbara saw after the guests' tea and sugar, and if they took cream or lemon, and tiresome things like that. And as everyone knew everyone else, and the same party met continuously all over England, things were very gay and friendly. Only Theodora and Josiah were completely out of it all, and several of the guests, who resented the intrusion of these strangers into their charmed circle, would take care on every opportunity to make them feel it. Hector did not get there until half an hour later in his automobile, which was the mode of arrival with more than 2/3 of the company. And until the dressing gong sounded, a continuous tuff 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 might have been heard as one after the other the cars whizzed up to the door. Of course, in a troop of over 30 people, naturally some had kind hearts and good manners, but the prevailing tone of this coterie of crème de la crème was one of pure selfishness and blunt and material brutality. If you were rich and suited them, you were given a nickname probably, and were allowed to play cards with them, and lose your money for their benefit. If you were non-congenial, you did not exist, that was all. You might be sitting in a chair, but they only saw it and empty space. You did not even cumber their ground. To do them justice, they preferred people of their own exalted station. Outsiders seldom made their way into this holy of holies, however rich they were, unless, of course, they happened to be Mildred's lovers. That situation for a man held special prerogatives, and was greatly coveted by pretenders to this circle of grace. Intellectual intelligence was not important. Some of the women of this select company had been described by an agricultural duke who had stayed there as having just enough sense to come in out of the rain. Sir Patrick Fitzgerald occasionally departed from the strict limits of this set in the big parties. Especially lately, when money was becoming scarcer, several financial friends who could put him on to good things had been included. The result being that Lady Harrowfield had not always shed the light of her countenance upon the festivities. Lord Harrowfield drew most of his income from a great populous manufacturing city in the north, so neither he nor his countess had need to smile at mere wealth. And Lady Harrowfield had said frankly, "Let me know if it is a utility party, Patrick, or for just ourselves, because if you are going to have these creatures, I shan't come." This time, however, she had not been so exigent. It happened to suit some other arrangements of hers to spend Whitsuntide at Beechley. So she consented to chaperone Morella Winmarleigh without asking for a list of the guests. Hector had never conformed to any special set. He went here, there, and everywhere, and was welcomed by all. But somehow, until this occasion, Beechley had never seen him within its gates, although Lady Harrowfield had praised him, and Mildred had sighed for him in vain. He saw the situation at a glance when he came into the salon. Josiah and Theodora sitting together, neglected by everyone but Barbara. They could not have been more than half an hour in the house, he knew, for he had found out when the trains got in. Barbara was a good sort. He remembered now he had met her before somewhere. She had evidently taken to the new cousin, but Mildred had not. Hitherto Mildred had been the undisputed and acknowledged beauty of every party, and she resented Theodora's presence because she was clever enough not to have any illusions upon the matter of their mutual looks. She saw Theodora was beautiful and young and charming, and had every advantage of perfect Paris clothes. Uncle Patrick had been a fool to ask her, and she must take measures to suppress her at once. Sir Patrick, on the other hand, was very pleased with himself for having given the invitation. He had made inquiries, and found that Josiah was a man of great and solid wealth, with interests in several things which could be of particular use to himself, and he meant to obtain what he could out of him. As for Theodora, no living man could do anything but admire her, and Sir Patrick was not an Irishman for nothing. Hector behaved with tact. He did not at once fly to his darling, but presently she found him beside her, and the now habitual thrill ran over her when he came near. He saw the sudden, convulsive clasp of her little hands together. He knew how he moved her, and it gave him joy. The next batch of arrivals contained Lord Wensleydown, who showed no hesitation as to his desired destination in the salon. He made a bee-line for Theodora, and took a low seat at her feet. Hector, with more caution, was rather to one side. Rage surged up in him, although his common sense told him as yet there was nothing he could openly object to in Wensleydown's behavior. The little picture of these 5 people, Barbara engaging Josiah, and the 2 men vying with each other to please Theodora, was gall and wormwood to Mildred. Freddy Wensleydown had always been one of her most valued friends, and for Hector she had often felt she could experience a passion. Lord Wensleydown had an immense cachet. He was exceedingly ugly and exceedingly smart, and was known to have quite specially attractive methods of his own in the art of pleasing beautiful ladies. He was always unfaithful, too, and they had to make particular efforts to retain him for even a week. Hector knew him intimately, of course. They had been in the same house at Eton, and were comrades of many years' standing, and until Theodora's entrance upon the scene, Hector had always thought of him as a coarse, jolly beast of extremely good company and quaintness. But now he had no words adequate in his vocabulary to express his opinion about him. To Theodora he appeared an ugly little man, who reminded her of the statue of a satyr she knew in the Louvre. That was all. At this juncture Lady Harrowfield, accompanied by Morella Winmarleigh, her lord, and one of her âmes damnées, a certain Captain Forrester, appeared upon the scene. Their entrance was the important one of the afternoon, and Lady Ada and Sir Patrick could not do enough to greet and make them welcome. The salon was so large and the screen so well arranged that for the first few seconds neither of the ladies perceived the fact of Theodora's presence, but when it burst upon them, both experienced unpleasant sensations. Lady Harrowfield's temper was bad in any case on account of the weather, and here, on her arrival, that she should find the impertinent upstart who had made her look foolish at the Anningford luncheon was an extra straw. Morella felt furious. It began to dawn upon her this might be Hector's reason in coming, not herself at all, and one of those slow internal rages which she seldom indulged in began to creep in her veins. Thus it was that poor Theodora, all unconscious of any evil, was already surrounded by three bitter enemies, Mildred, Lady Harrowfield, and Morella Winmarleigh. It did not look as though her Whitsuntide could be going to contain much joy. It was a good deal after 6 o'clock by now. Bridge tables had already appeared, and most of the company had commenced to play. Barbara saw the look in Mildred's eye as she came across, and, ignoring Theodora quite, tried to carry off Lord Wensleydown. "You must come, Freddie," she said. "Lady Harrowfield wants to begin her rubber." Barbara, knowing what this move meant, and blushing for her cousin's rudeness, nervously introduced Theodora to her. "How do?" said Mildred, staring over her head. "Don't detain Lord Wensleydown, please, because Lady Harrowfield hates to be kept waiting." Theodora rose and smiled, while she said to Barbara, "I am rather tired. Mayn't I go to my room for a little rest before dinner?"
"Take him, Lady Mildred, do," said Hector. "We don't want him." And he laughed gaily. His beautiful, tender angel might be a match for these people after all. At any rate, he would be at her side to protect her from their claws. Lord Wensleydown frowned. Mildred was being a damned nuisance, he said to himself, and he insisted upon accompanying Theodora to the bottom of the great staircase, which rose to magnificent galleries in the hall adjoining the salon. Sir Patrick had advanced and engaged Josiah in conversation. He knew his guests' ways and how they would boycott him, and with a serious question like those Australian shares on the tapis, he was not going to have Josiah insulted and ruffled just yet.
"Don't stay upstairs all the time," Hector had managed to whisper, while Mildred and Lord Wensleydown stood arguing. "They are sure not to dine until 9. There are 2 hours before you need dress, and we can certainly find some nice sitting room to talk in." But Theodora, with immense self-denial, had answered, "No, I want to write a long letter to Papa and my sisters. I won't come down again until dinner." And he was forced to be content with the memory of her soft smile and the evident regret in her eyes. End of chapter 23.